The Trudeau government came under fire recently for admitting that Canada will get COVID vaccines later than other countries. To discuss this in more detail is Toronto Sun journalist Brian Lilley. Brian, while the United States could start receiving their vaccines next month, it'll be what, late January at the earliest for Canadians?
Yeah, the United States, according to some reports, could be as early as December 11th, depending on what the Food and Drug Administration does. Here in Canada, even if we have quicker approval, which I'm not convinced we will with Health Canada, even, look, all of these major organizations work together, the FDA, Public Health Canada, they all share information, and they're all supposed to have, where one approves, the other can give quick approval. And at a time like this, we need that. And yet, on things like rapid testing, Canada's been slow. So we could be delayed by a couple of things. One, the approval process that the government decides to follow within Canada. And two, the fact that, according to the Prime Minister, he says we just don't have massive vaccine production capabilities anymore. Well, we used to. And I remember the Harper government giving a contract to a Quebec vaccine manufacturer to say, look, if we need the H1N1 vaccine, when we get it, you will be making it. And they gave them a bunch of money to make sure that Canada had it. I'll give the Trudeau government credit on some things. They've gone around and they've come to agreements with Pfizer in the US, with AstraZeneca in the UK, with Moderna. All these different companies around the world, they're signing, I think it's up to 7 different agreements to get whatever vaccines they can. But we are nowhere near the front of the line, and that is a major problem.
Now, a big question is how will the vaccines get from the federal government to the local communities? There's even talk of using the Army, Brian. Now, you spoke with General Rick Hillier, who's heading up the distribution task force. He's probably telling you it's a pretty big job.
Well, he's heading up the distribution task force for Ontario alone. And what's surprising here is that we're starting to get more information from provincial governments than federal governments. And the federal government has been under pressure to say, tell us what your plan is. We know you don't have a vaccine yet. We know that none have been fully approved. We're hopeful that they will come soon, but they could show up sooner than expected. We weren't expecting that Pfizer could be ready as early as December 11th or Moderna could be ready before the end of the year. Now we're looking at that. Okay, what if Canada miraculously gets vaccine before the end of the year or in early January? Are we ready? The feds keep delaying and saying nothing. The Ford government here in Ontario decided we need help. And it was Premier Doug Ford who said, you know what? I want a general in charge. I want an expert in logistics. And he called up General Rick Hillier, who was Chief of Defense Staff from 2005 to 2008, led Canada's forces through some of the toughest days in Afghanistan and knows about logistics. I talked to him and he says he's up for the job, but it's going to be difficult. I also did ask him, for all those who are saying, oh, no, I don't like the Army being involved. It means it's going to be a mandatory vaccine and troops will come by and shove it in my arm. And he said, get real. That's not going to happen. We don't have mandatory vaccines in Canada, and the Army's not going to be doing that. But they are ready to stand by and help with distribution, which is going to be a massive undertaking, especially for Pfizer. Remember, this is the vaccine that needs to be kept at -70 Celsius in order to stay stable.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has allegedly been taking some shots at premiers of late, claiming that they're behind on rapid testing, that he's given them millions of rapid tests which are not being used. Is this really true?
No, unfortunately not at all. And it's a bit of a break in what we've seen as, a wall of solidarity between the premiers and the federal government. And it's not coming from premiers taking shots at the Prime Minister. Occasionally they will say, look, Prime Minister, we need the rapid test approved. We heard that a lot from Premier Jason Kenney in Alberta, Premier Doug Ford in Ontario, but it was never partisan. And it wasn't, hey, you're sitting on it. It was, this is our priority. We need it done. Well, finally, the rapid tests are approved. And yes, the feds have said that they will fund millions of tests to go to the province, but they haven't sent them. And so last week, the Prime Minister said this in the House of Commons, and I called the Ford government and said, what's going on? They said, you've got to talk to the bureaucrats about this. This is not a political question. I talked to the bureaucrats from the Ministry of Health in Ontario and from Public Health Ontario, which is an arm's length organization that they actually run the testing. They both told me the same thing. So the Prime Minister says millions of tests across the country. The biggest province, 40% of the population, at that point had received 89,000 ID Now tests. These are the ones from Abbott Laboratories. 70,000 PanBio tests, which are still kind of being, sussed out. They spent the last few weeks, they would run a rapid test alongside a standard PCR test just to make sure that they are calibrated properly and that they're doing them accurately. They have been deployed by the provinces. Alberta's been running the program out at Calgary Airport. But the Prime Minister, for whatever reason, is trying to make it sound like he's doing his job. It's those premiers that aren't. That's playing politics with the pandemic. It's not what we need.
While we're all in this pandemic together, Brian, you obtained federal data showing that while many private sector workers lost their jobs, close to 60,000 federal workers were apparently sent home and told to collect pay while not working.
Yeah, this is remarkable. And that phrase, we're all in this together. How many times have we heard politicians say this? I haven't been able to obtain provincial numbers from any province, but the federal government, I'm sorry, this is frustrating. 58,000, more than 58,000 workers were sent home with pay on what's called 699. That's leave other. So that's not maternity leave, it's not sick leave, it's not bereavement leave, it's not long-term disability. And on the government's website, they say this is specifically about COVID-19, and many people didn't have childcare or they couldn't connect through their IT networks. Well, there were a lot of people in the private sector who had trouble with childcare, who had trouble with their IT networks, and had to figure it out. At the same time, there were 2.7 million Canadians in this time frame between mid-March and early April who lost their jobs. 2.7 million Canadians lost their jobs. Another 2.8 million saw reduced hours, significantly reduced hours, according to StatsCan. And 58,000 federal workers were told, go home and collect pay. It's more than 18 million hours were paid out between mid-March and the beginning of September. The last date we have is September 6th. At that point, there were about 8,400 workers still on this leave. Since I published this piece in the Toronto Sun, Hal, federal workers have contacted me and said, you don't know the half of it. Some departments didn't even use this code, which tells us how many were on that. So they were just told, go home, don't worry about working. Others have told me the incidents of departments using 699, this code, have gone up again. One worker saying after being off for 6 months, they got back to regular work. Now they're down to 2 days a week and 3 days at home with pay. They said they don't like it. They said, I don't feel right about being paid to sit at home, collect full pay while watching TV because I'm told not to go anywhere.
Brian, there's a new report outlining some problems with the new federal loan program. It's for businesses in trouble that have hired more consultants than the number of companies it gave out loans to.
Yeah, this is remarkable. A multi-billion-dollar program that has given out very little money just to two companies, a casino company and a coal mining company. This is supposed to be for large employers. It's supposed to be the lender of last resort if a company gets into trouble. And they've given out loans to two companies, but they've given out consulting contracts to many more. This is bizarre. Conservative MP Michael Cooper digging up this info, putting it out in the public and saying, this is yet another example of how the federal government just hasn't been able to get programs for businesses right. I'll give the Trudeau government credit where it's due. They, despite some problems, they got CERB out the door. When people needed money just to be able to put food on the table, the money was there. But when it came to this, this giant program to help large companies stay afloat, so that we didn't have companies that employed thousands of people going out of business and laying off workers, they got it wrong. When it came to the rent relief program, they got it wrong. And even with the updated rent relief program, they got it wrong. When it came to the wage subsidy program, they've messed that up more than once. And it's as if, one bankruptcy consultant who talked to me, represents small and medium-sized businesses, said, when I look at how the federal government designs these programs, it's clear to me that there's nobody on the inside designing them that has any idea how businesses work.
With the feds doling out hundreds of millions of dollars, our debt just keeps on rising, Brian. We've not seen a federal budget in almost 2 years now. Are we getting any closer to getting a handle on our finances? Our debt is over $1 trillion.
Well, we think it's over $1 trillion. When asked, they'll never actually answer. I mean, these are estimates from private sector economists, from the parliamentary budget officer. Pierre Poilievre, the conservative finance critic, has asked multiple times, is this accurate? And he gets nowhere. We're hoping in about a week we'll get some sense, but it won't even be a full budget. The last budget we had, I believe it was the end of February. I know it was in Ottawa for it. It was around the same time as Jody Wilson-Raybould hearings, late February, early March of 2019. And now it's almost 2 years later, and what we're going to get is a fiscal update. It's not unusual to get a fiscal update in October or November, but normally there's been a budget, say, in March sometime. This is going to be the closest we get to a snapshot. And given how reluctant newly minted Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has been to divulge any information, I'm not sure how clear a picture we will get. If it's like past ones, it will be an eye-opener. If it's the way the government has been behaving lately, it will be a lot of smoke and mirrors. So we'll have to wait and see a week from Wednesday.
Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne is warning that tough talk on China could hurt the release of the two Michaels, Kovrig and Spavor. Meanwhile, there are other MPs who are part of a group demanding that Ottawa release Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou.
And Nikki Ashton from the NDP and newly minted Green leader Annamie Paul, who was hoping for a seat. She lost in the Toronto Centre by-election, so she is not my MP, thank goodness. She's out there campaigning with the Communist Party of China to release Miss Meng. That's confusing to me. It's also confusing to me why Minister Champagne is now saying this tough talk is going to hurt things. The Trudeau government, after not having tough talk for a long time, started having tough talk. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, the Defense Minister called it hostage negotiations, or hostage diplomacy, sorry. Now suddenly they're backing away from their own tough talk. It does leave you scratching your head. It is more than 700 days that these two men have been held hostage by China in response to Meng Wanzhou being detained on an extradition treaty. China wants an extradition treaty with us, by the way, but they don't want us to honor the ones that we have. So a little bit confusing there. But I'm not sure why they've decided to go from not saying anything negative about China to getting tough on them to now saying we can't have tough talk. It leaves you scratching your head. How?
Brian, when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his gun ban on May 1st, he cited the Nova Scotia massacre that occurred days earlier as part of his reasoning. But even though Trudeau's solution focuses on legal gun owners, you obtained a briefing that shows he knew before the announcement that the Nova Scotia shooter only had illegal guns.
Yeah, and within days, myself and others in the media had either been contacted or contacted people who knew Gabriel Wortman and said that they had reported him to the RCMP. His own father told my colleague Joe Warmington that he had reported his son to the RCMP for threats of violence. And people had reported that he had illegal weapon stashes, and they never went to see them. So I'm not shocked that this briefing note presented to Trudeau days after the shooting on April 24th showed that he knew 3 of the firearms that he used were smuggled in from the United States. A law enforcement carbine, that's the rifles that police now carry. It was traced to a California gun shop, never legally imported into Canada. 2 pistols purchased at a gun shop in Maine, illegally smuggled into Canada. And then a Ruger Mini 14, which is a fairly common rifle in Canada, but was purchased in Canada. No idea how Wortman got his hands on it because he never was authorized to own guns in this country. So there's a lot of questions about that. Despite that, Trudeau went out and said he was bringing in the gun ban. Now, for people that don't understand why this matters, the Prime Minister's solution to a massacre that happened is not to deal with crime, not to deal with gun smuggling, but to say to legal gun owners who are already following the law, you have to hand over your rifles. We've known for a long time the major problem with gun crime in this country is the border. Doesn't matter what area of the country we're talking about, it's the border. They're going to spend close to $1 billion on this so-called gun buyback. Meanwhile, $86 million over 5 years for the RCMP and the Canada Border Service Agency to deal with smuggling issues.
One of our regular contributors, Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilley, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.